first up, land. Resolution 2015 authorizing the execution of an agreement for infrastructure management services.
All right, living dangerously, I see here. Good evening, Council, Mayor. The discussion item before you tonight is regarding a pavement management services, professional services contract. This has been talked about within the Public Works Committee earlier this month, and so part of our conversation there was to bring that conversation back to the full council to get some input and feedback on the scope of the services. So just background a little bit, going back to June of this year, an RFQ was led, or a request for qualifications, and it was to solicit the qualifications of engineering firms to come out and do a pavement condition rating index and determine the quality of the roads and put a numerical rating on the road network, common from 0 to 100 being the typical scoring gradient, 100 being a perfect score, 0 being not where you want to be. So the respondents that we only had one respondent to the RFQ, and that was infrastructure management services, and that information packet, I definitely feel that they're a well-qualified, nationally respected firm, and they do work in other Washington cities, and if council approves this professional services agreement, the work would actually be done in the September timeframe for the initial rating of the street network, public street network, and then the analytical work would be done back in their offices, and we would get a final report around November, December. Now, the benefit of this study is not only does it give a numerical rating of the street network, the public street network, it will also, as part of the report and the tasking, is it will identify the dollar amount needed to bring the streets up to a better condition. For example, one of the parameters that will be built into the contract is if Pacific had unlimited budget and wanted to go out and improve all of the public streets tomorrow, what would that cost? So that becomes one bookend of the study. The other bookend of the study is, what if you do nothing and spend $0 on the street network? What does that do to the degradation? How do the streets continue to degrade? And what does that look like over a period of time? And then somewhere in between, they'll run a couple different analyses in different scenarios to do the what if. So what if you spend $100,000? What if you spend $500,000? What does that do to the condition of the street network? And then, as a council and an elected body, it will provide you the type of information I think you need to be able to make financial decisions on how aggressive or where to find that sweet spot with what the city can afford to spend, as well as maybe there's other options we need to consider in looking at raising additional revenue to be able to spend money on the street network. So tonight, one of the considerations is there's a baseline contract, and that is a little over $29,000. And what that does is that allows the team to come in with their equipment, they're fully mobilized, and then they will use their imagery equipment and drive the street network. That information is collected and gathered, and then they go back and spend time doing the analysis and really rating, not from a subjective opinion of what the street network looks like, but really an objective valuation. For example, they'll measure the size of potholes, they'll measure delamination on asphalt segments, where there's alligator cracking, where there's transverse cracking, longitudinal cracking, and they'll put a numerical value to that, because that's all the things, as you intuitively know, degrade your asphalt. But there's a national testing method that they follow and protocols, so it's a real objective rating when you get the report at the end of the day. So that's the baseline survey. Something I would like council to consider as well, and this is helping accelerate and move into the asset management realm. And so I have put together, and I would recommend that we also do a sign inventory database. And that's about $8,900 as an additive cost on top of the $29,000. The value to that is when they do the survey with the initial imagery work, the additional components that they'll capture, it's mostly in office work where they're now validating to a GPS coordinate and validating the accuracy down to centimeters, where the signs are located, the type of sign. So we would get a full inventory of our signing database, where currently we do not have one at all. And that, as we're trying to make improvements on our infrastructure and our asset management, this is one of the areas we're deficit, and this would be a quick, easy way to help accelerate that process. So I'll stop talking at this point and certainly answer any questions you have about the process, the contract, or what the expectations are.
Questions from council?
We talked about it before in Public Works, but the visual capturing of the surface of the road, but are we also in this budgeting relation to the depth, the sonic, I guess, ultrasonic view? Are we looking at that also in this contract, or is that separate?
That would be a separate contract, and that pricing wasn't included in the proposal. My personal opinion is on the type of data that we would capture from the surface condition. If you have rutting and big depressions in your roadways, I think you'll know that there's subsurface activity going on there that we would need to attend to. So for this initial survey, I really think we'll get good value not having to spend the extra money to go subsurface. Great question.
Budget figure, where's the money coming from?
We have a couple options. Richard and I haven't really collaborated on the two sources of money, but the one operational funding item that I would recommend is there's $100,000 in the operating budget for chip seal, and I would recommend that this really gives you the type of information this year that would allow you to make some decisions next year, whether you want to do overlays, chip seals, and so I think that's a logical source. Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we also looked at the streets capital as well as a possible source.
Streets is, it's building its reserve this year, so it's in good position to be able to afford that.
Councilor Steyer.
Well, there's a couple of things, as you all know, I'm always very, don't like spending money on studies. I like to get things done. But unfortunately, we never have had a really inventory of the condition of our streets. And it's something that we have to have. And that way, if we need to go to the voters, we actually have some firm information to give them as to why Tacoma Boulevard needs to be done in specific places. The next thing is the sign. Now, one thing that last didn't cover on is that the reflectability of signs, there's some new laws out now and whatever, so there's a possibility that some of our stop signs and so forth do not have adequate reflectability, and that you get a real Philadelphia lawyer in here and somebody has an accident at an intersection and we find out that the sign didn't have proper reflectability, then they can pull the city into the accident because the guy ran the stop sign, and it just creates a lot of questions. So if we do this study, then we have something in our files to say, hey, we just did a study, that sign does meet all standards. And if we don't meet standards, let's get them replaced, because we need it for just general safety of our public. So, $8,000, I don't know, a sign, I don't know what they cost. What would it cost to just go out and replace all stop signs in town? Would that be $8,000? And then we'd have all new ones, and we don't have to have a study? I don't know, but I don't know what other extent. We don't have any really curve signs. We don't care about it really, whether they can read Aspen Lane or not. I don't know. That's the question that somebody needs to answer for me.
Well, to build on this point, we actually can't go out and replace all the stop signs in town right now reliably because we don't know where they all are.
Oh, that would be easy to find right up there.
But someone would have to drive around and count how many of them we need to replace. We don't have that list. How many stop signs do you need to order? So you can pay them some labor cost just to do that.
That's
Not
not,
$8,000, but.
that's not that difficult to do.
But you miss one on some back streets, nobody goes down, there's where your accident happens.
Anyway,
Yeah.
So does the stop sign, or does the sign study include street signs, street names, or is it just?
It's regulatory and street name signs. So it gives us a comprehensive inventory, and I think Councilmember Steiger is correct, and I appreciate him reminding the council of the conversation. It's also a risk management question as well, that the reflectivity of the signs, you want your signs to be within a service, they all have a service life, so you need a starting point from the inventory to be able to manage when your signs go out of service, and because of the reflective material on the sign. So this really gets that baseline for us, and then we could through spreadsheets and just manage the sign inventory that way.
I tend to agree that money spent on a study versus just making a commitment to replace the signs is wasting money. I think our signs are fairly old in town, probably don't meet the new standards, so we're going to have to buy them anyway. So why don't we just make a commitment to replace all the signs, and this time around, create the inventory so that we have it on record, what intersections have what signs, the date they were purchased, so that we know what the service life will be for them, and just do it that way. And I'd rather spend that money replacing the signs than having someone tell us we need to replace the signs, but we kind of know we already need to do it. So why don't we just make the commitment and spend the money if we have the money in the fund, and just, if we're not gonna put chip seal down on streets this year, and we budgeted for it, let's just use some of that money along with the money that's in the street fund and just make a commitment to replace the sign.
What's the stop sign cost? Off the top of your head.
$50. That's off the top of my head. I'll validate that before next council meeting. If I may, just real quickly in response, and I haven't shared this concept or this idea, and I'm certainly not going to speak before council and say we're really deficit on our staffing. I may hold that opinion, but I'm not going to share it. But what I would like to introduce as the concept is, because we are challenged with staff and all the tasking that we do have, I would ask council to think of some of these professional services contracts and the other studies and things that we do. Is it like having a staff member do the work for us, but allowing us to continue on with the other work that we already have for us and on our plate. So doing the sign inventory and paying somebody to do that, it allows our staff to stay focused on the things that we already have planned for this calendar year and the work plan that we've created for 2015.
Probably off the top of your head, approximately how many signs are we talking about?
I honestly don't know, and I don't want to venture a guess, and that's really the problem.
Councilmember Steiger, just a moment.
I think maybe we need to, as far as the sign part of this, is try to get a rough idea how many stop signs we've got, and in the conversation here and everything else, when he said street signs, I was opposed to the street signs to begin with, but we do have to think of the 911 safety. Now, are our streets adequate for our fire and police response as to for what street is what? I don't know.
Councilor Sutter.
Another advantage of doing a systematic inventory is that if we get it in GIS format, we'll also discover missing signs that, just to give one example, my street sign for Third Place was knocked down 3 years ago. I've reported it 4 times. It's never been replaced. It's no longer laying there. I don't know where it is, but it's gone. So I'm not going to report it again, but it'd be nice if it shows up, oh, hey, there's a street sign that showed at this intersection.
Well, and to Clint's point, knowing where everything's at gives, gives us a spreadsheet of where everything's at forever. So, we can create a replacement plan and know that every 3 years we need to replace the stop sign at such and such intersection. It gives us more than just the current street sign. I know I hate spending money too, but $8 grand, if we went to do this next year outside of this contract, is it going to cost us more to hire a separate company to do just this? Probably. So,
I would say before we move on, let's get a rough idea of approximately how many, and just use stop signs, just rough idea how many that would be, and see what that dollar figure would be to replace all stop signs. Kind of as a guideline as to whether we're going to spend the $8,000 or not. Maybe we don't have to spend 100 hours of staff time, and we just kind of roughly, actually probably just look at a map, the stop signs here, I mean, just write it. You wouldn't have to actually go out and drive or anything.
And how the street, Lord Avenue, yeah, all of it.
The regulatory, the caution mark.
That's gonna cost a ton of money to just replace them all without even looking at them. Another question, is it because they're missing reflective tape or whatever that is so that your headlights hit it? Or do the words have to be reflective? How does that work? I mean, I'm not saying run around town and put reflective tape on everything, but...
It's the material that makes up the sign itself. There's different grades of material. There's a straight vinyl, and then there's an engineering grade, and then there's a high visibility grade. So you have choices to make with the type of material for your signs, and stop signs is probably one of the best examples, and they all have a life expectancy per the type of material.
Okay, well, I have one more question. The state of Washington used to require all license plates on cars be replaced, I don't know, every 7 years. Well, they quit doing that because the reflectiveness on it that is what they were worried about. They said it was null and void. So what's to say that our signs won't be in compliance? Or they change the laws every 17 minutes.
It becomes a risk management issue to a degree, and I think it's where council's tolerance is for risk. Now, you can set a schedule to replace the signs, just use stop signs as an example, at a certain number of years based on the type of material that the sign is made up of. So the high visibility signs, they have a faster degradation rate, and they would have to be replaced sooner. Now, a lower grade may last a little bit. It sounds counterintuitive, but it would last a little bit longer because of the UV influence on that highly reflective material. But it's really a choice, and you can put a schedule together. And the point is if you have a replacement schedule for your high-risk signs, it's a defensible standard. The guidance in the federal doesn't tell you you have to do it in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, just that you've analyzed the problem and have developed a methodology to make sure that you're your stop signs and your regulatory signs are being managed well.
Is part of the study also looking at sight distances to ensure that the signs are visible? Because as an emergency responder, that's the biggest problem I find is, you know, municipalities say that there needs to be so much greenery within the communities, and it's typically done between the sidewalk and the street, and then the trees brush out so much and they don't get trimmed back, and then you can't see the signs no matter how reflective they are because the brush is in the way, especially in a fire engine where you're elevated. And that's the biggest problem I have when I'm out trying to find someone's address is that the sight distances are limited because of the greenery, not necessarily the reflectivity of the sign system.
Yeah, that's certainly a good point, Councilmember Cave. And that level of detail for the sight distances, I would expect to see a discrepancy report coming, but I have not asked that specific question of the consultant. But between now and next week, I certainly will do so.
I have a couple other questions, not about signs. Let me see this. Three. It says assist the city with this, updating the spreadsheet with its annual maintenance in non-testing years. This isn't an ongoing contract where they're going to come out and test every so often, right?
No, that's correct. This is a one-time contract for this particular service.
And then on page 1 of the cost schedule for final council presentation, it's $3,000. That's 10% of the contract. What are we getting for that? Because right above it is the pavement analysis report. What's the $3,000 paying?
More than likely, it's the airfare and the time to be here, because it's an out-of-state firm that performs the work. That's something I can negotiate if we don't want a presentation from the firm. We just want the report. We can certainly look at reducing costs that way.
I don't know. I was going to say, as long as the staff understands the results of the report, I'm not going to provide any additional insight.
Staff doesn't understand the report in the $3,000 presentation.
Yeah.
I'm going to help.
They're out of Arizona.
No, don't we have anybody local that does this?
There was a firm that this was sent to, but they chose not to respond.
Really, if they chose not to respond, that's awesome.
We don't want that.
So, but that $3,000 was just to kind of present to council. Everything else would be conference calls and meetings with staff to make sure that you understand what the results.
Absolutely. I'll have to get a reporting on the cost makeup of that $3,000. I think it was more than one meeting, so I'll make sure I get that breakdown.
Okay.
But hearing from council, there's not an interest in having that level of support for presentation.
We appreciate you. Other questions from council? Objection?
Just one, does this identify pavement markings as well? And we've talked about crosswalk conditions around the city. Are they identifying crosswalks as well as signs?
No, that's a separate cost. It is broken out if you're interested. I can look at it, but it's around $5,000, I think, for crosswalks.
That's few enough crosswalks.
And the reason we didn't do that is both the sidewalks and the crosswalks, the city engineer felt we have enough information that we have an inventory that's underway.
Without objection, we'll move forward.
So is that with the additional?
The additional signage.
I thought that was factored in the price.
No, it's the 30,000 plus the 8,000.
Well, I don't think we can actually.
Made our motion next week.
I just wanted to know if they wanted to bring it.
It would be helpful for the city attorney in the legal review that we have a defined dollar amount. I recognize that I may have to negotiate a couple of the items that we discussed, but having clear direction tonight whether to include the sign database would help me pin down the final cost of the service.
So I guess I have a question, and I was looking at saw the project subtotal on there, so you're saying optional services. Some of these other optional services look like services we should have, like the sidewalk database and obstruction survey for ADA compliance. Those seem like pretty important things to have, and we didn't really discuss. And I think those are more important than sign and support database development, personally. I mean, if we really feel that a lot of these things are necessary, then I don't see why we wouldn't do all of them.
In response, I think I mentioned Councilmember Cave that working with the city engineer in review of this and some of the information that he has already developed, that so the ADA issues, sidewalk, and the marking issues, he felt that we have a good enough start that that's something that we could do separately outside of this program. But it was the sign inventory where we just didn't have any basic information to work with. And hence, that's the reason for that recommendation. Not that it's not a good idea.
Does that mean we have no sign inventory at all then? Is that what that's?
Correct.
Okay. So your recommendation is to do this because the amount of staff time that would be committed to doing it, this more than offset. Is that what you're saying?
I believe it would be very close. If it's not a one-for-one offset, it would be close.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Councilwoman Snyder.
If we go ahead and give him the, okay, we talked to the attorney, and give him the 38,000, whatever, that's actually in two separate segments. We can always hold the 8,000 because he has to come back with some additional information anyway that we're looking for. So let's have him present the whole package, and then we can make sure those are two separate segments so we can vote.
You can waste your time now, or you can waste your time later.
No, I mean, you just have the attorney look at the whole thing and say, okay, if you do this, it's fine. Okay, well, we don't want to do B, we'll do C.
So we'll take a look at the whole package next week.
Okay.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.